the most recognizable statue anywhere in the world.
There is a statue in the Egyptian desert that has stared at the same sunrise for roughly 4,500 years. Everyone knows its outline: a lion's body, a human head, paws stretched out across the sand like it's waiting for something. But almost nobody knows that this statue has a door, not a metaphorical one. An actual cut opening, hidden at the back of its body, sealed shut on purpose, buried under stone for over half a century until two men pried it open and climbed inside. What they found down there is stranger than any treasure could have been. And to understand why, we need to start with the statue itself, because nearly everything people assume about it turns out to be only half the story. The Great Sphinx of Giza was never assembled piece by piece the way the pyramids beside it were. It was carved directly out of a living bedrock of the Giza Plateau, one continuous slab of limestone that ancient workers exposed by cutting a wide trench around it, then shaped from the top down into a reclining lion wearing a pharaoh's face. Most Egyptologists place its creation around 2500 BC, during the 4th dynasty, and connect it to the pharaoh Khafre, whose pyramid looms directly behind it. A smaller number of researchers argue the face may belong to his father Khufu or his brother Jedefra instead. The debate has never fully closed. What's not in dispute is the scale, nearly 240 feet long, about 66 feet tall, a single sculpture carved from a single ridge of stone, making it one of the oldest and largest monolithic statues human hands have ever produced. To the people who built it, this was never simply a monument. Centuries after its carving, Egyptians were actively worshipping it as a god called Hor-em-Akhe, Horus in the horizon, a solar deity gazing eastward into the rising sun. It was sacred. It was protected. And that's what makes its long history of abuse so strange, because for thousands of years afterward, people kept finding reasons to break into it. Part of that history is simply about sand. The Sphinx sits in a low stone pit, and the Sahara has spent millennia trying to swallow it whole. Wind-blown dunes buried the body again and again, sometimes leaving nothing visible, but the head floating above an empty sea of sand. The earliest record of a rescue effort still stands between the statue's paws today. The Dream Stele, a granite slab placed there by Pharaoh Thutmose for more than 3,000 years ago. According to the inscription, Thutmose fell asleep near the buried head as a young prince and dreamed that the Sphinx promised him the throne of Egypt if he freed it from the sand. Whether that was a genuine vision or clever propaganda for a prince without a clear claim to the crown, the pattern it set repeated itself for centuries. Every so often, someone had to dig the god back out of the desert. The last of these great excavations happened in the 20th century, led by a French engineer named Émile Bourais, who spent much of the 1920s and 1930s clearing the entire body and enclosure down to the base for the first time in living memory. Bourais matters to this story for a specific reason. As he uncovered the Sphinx, he also resealed several of its strangest features, quietly closing doors that generations after him would spend decades trying to reopen. Long before Bourais, long before modern archaeology existed at all, people already believed the Sphinx was hollow. Not cracked, not weathered, deliberately hollow, hiding a chamber inside its skull. Some versions of the legend claimed secret tunnels connected the nearby pyramids to the Sphinx's head, allowing priests to climb inside and speak through it as though the statue itself were delivering oracles to worshippers below. The idea took firmer root nearly 2,000 years ago, when the Roman historian Pliny the Elder recorded a local belief that the Sphinx wasn't solid stone at all but a tomb, built to hold the remains of a king. That single claim echoed through the centuries. By the time European travelers began writing about Egypt in the 1400s and 1500s, the logic had calcified into something almost unshakable. If a king was buried inside, the head must be hollow to contain him. And if the head was hollow, there had to be a way in. Each generation added its own layer of certainty to the last, until in the popular imagination, the Sphinx wasn't a statue anymore. It was a locked vault wearing a face. That's the atmosphere real archaeologists eventually walked into, not a blank, untouched monument, but a statue that people had already spent 2,000 years convinced was hiding something. So when actual excavation began turning up real cavities in the stone, nobody treated it calmly. The first opening to cause a stir sat right on top of the head, a rectangular shaft, roughly 5 feet across and 6 feet deep, cut straight down into the crown. Visitors described climbing up and peering into it for generations. You won't see it today because Barais filled it with cement and bolted an iron hatch over the opening during his excavation. The most sober explanation offered by researchers is almost disappointingly practical. The shaft likely once anchored a crown or ceremonial headdress onto the statue, a fixture long since lost to time. But even that mundane answer concedes something important. The head of a sphinx isn't an untouched solid mass. Something was built into it. That admission opens the door to a much rougher chapter. In the 1830s, a British explorer named Richard Howard Weiss arrived at Giza convinced the statue was hiding chambers, and unlike modern archaeologists, he wasn't interested in patience. Working with his engineer John Paring, Weiss drove a boring rod nearly 30 feet into the body of the Sphinx, searching for a hollow void. The rod jammed. Rather than accept defeat, Weiss packed gunpowder around the stuck drill, prepared to blast his way free, willing to risk detonating explosives inside one of the oldest surviving sculptures on Earth. In the end, he lost his nerve and abandoned the effort. The forgotten borehole, later nicknamed Paring's Hole, sat untouched for more than a century until the Egyptian archaeologist Zahi Hawass finally cleared it out in 1978 and pulled from inside it a broken fragment of the Sphinx's own headdress, swallowed by the very hole treasure hunters had drilled into it generations earlier. Then there's the feature that fooled people longest, an enormous fissure splitting the statue's back, wide enough in places to climb into, that generations of visitors swore was the mouth of a hidden passage. In the 1850s, French archaeologist Auguste Mariette investigated it and briefly believed he might be onto something before concluding it was largely a natural fault in the rock, later widened by human hands. Decades later, the Egyptologist Mark Lehner mapped the crack in painstaking detail and confirmed what Mariette suspected. The fissure is a genuine geological fracture running through the limestone the Sphinx was carved from, not an engineered doorway. It simply narrows and dead ends against raw bedrock. Barais sealed this one too, roofing it over with iron, limestone, and cement, fitting yet another hidden hatch that visitors walk directly over without ever knowing it's there. But just a short distance from that natural fissure sat something entirely different, a passage that was not natural at all, and the story of its rediscovery is the heart of everything. In 1980, an elderly local man named Muhammad Abd al-Magoud Fayed approached Hawass and Lehner with a memory from his boyhood. Decades earlier, as a young worker during Barais' excavation, he had seen an opening at the rear of the statue that was uncovered, and then deliberately sealed back up. Other elderly workers backed up his account. Acting on a memory 60 years old, the team searched the northwestern haunch of the lion and found the exact masonry casing that had been set in place in the 1920s to hide the opening. They lifted it, and beneath lay a passage almost nobody alive still remembered existed. What they found sloped downward at a steep angle, running roughly 13 feet in length and dropping about 16 feet below the enclosure floor, narrowing from over 4 feet wide at the entrance to barely a meter at its base. The walls carried unmistakable tool marks. This had been cut deliberately, using techniques that closely resemble how ancient Egyptians dug shafts for tombs. Some researchers have suggested it may even predate later restoration work done during the New Kingdom, which would make it remarkably old. Hawass and Lehner climbed down to follow it to its end, hoping to finally answer what generations of legend had promised was waiting inside the body of the Sphinx. The passage simply stopped. It dead-ended in plain, undisturbed bedrock. No chamber, no sarcophagus, no hidden library, nothing at all. The most likely explanation, based on the tool marks and the way the shaft was dug, is almost anticlimactic. Treasure hunters, at some point after the statue was already ancient, dug this passage themselves, certain they were about to find something valuable hidden inside a god. They were wrong, and rather than admit it, they sealed the evidence of their failure behind a stone and walked away, leaving it to be forgotten for generations until an old man's childhood memory dragged it back into daylight. And that more than any tale of lost civilizations or buried libraries, is the real secret the Sphinx has been guarding. Not a vault of forbidden knowledge, but proof that long before modern archaeologists ever arrived with their careful tools and photographs, other hands had already broken into this monument chasing certainty of their own, and found only rock. The passage doesn't lead to an answer. It leads to the shape of somebody else's obsession, cut into stone and hidden for decades, waiting for a memory old enough to bring it back. So the Sphinx keeps its real mystery in the quietest possible way, not by hiding something extraordinary, but by refusing, even now, to fully explain